welcome back to the third installment of Anesthesia 205, Engage and Empower Me, a patient engagement design class. Pleasure to have you back with us today. I'm Dr. Larry Chu. I'm co-teaching this course with Kyra Babinet from the Persuasive Technology Lab at Stanford, and I, of course, am from MedX at Stanford. It is a pleasure for me to introduce our first speaker today. Her name is Liza Bernstein, and she is a 3-time cancer survivor. She is a member of our Stanford MedX ePatient Advisory Panel, and she's going to start things off with a talk, followed by Dennis Boyle from Ideo and Brian Garcia from Healthigan. So, Liza, welcome.
Thank you, thank you. Hello, I'm Liza Bernstein, and I've had cancer 3 times. Engage and empower me. That sentence is framed from the patient's point of view. What I want you to think about is how we might engage and empower each other, how we might collaborate as equal partners, each of us bringing different and complementary expertise to the table. Exactly 20 years ago this week, the 3rd week of January, 1994, just days after the Northridge earthquake had thrown me out of my bed and devastated Los Angeles, I was further shaken to the core by a diagnosis of breast cancer. I was only 29 years old. There was no cancer in my family, and I was otherwise completely healthy. When I began my journey through cancer, I didn't think of myself as an empowered or an engaged patient. I was just me, in shock, terrified, ignorant, just me. But growing up in 3 countries, the daughter of a journalist and a photographer, I was equipped with unusually high levels of sensitivity and curiosity, a detective's craving for observation and research, and a deep desire to connect and be present with people. I was also raised to figure things out on my own. In short, I was primed to become an e-patient. All that was required was one of those extraordinary meetings of the minds and an invitation. That happened when I saw a highly regarded oncologist for a second opinion. Right from the get-go, there was a blaring clue that she was special. She asked me to call her Philomena and not Dr. McAndrew. I was intimidated enough as it was, but I could tell that she was being genuine, and her title was not going to be a barrier between us. Philomena engaged me. She recognized that while I might not have even known how to articulate this concept, what I was grasping for that day in her office was a way to be active in my own situation, AKA empowerment. I often give this example. She told me that before she could decide whether or not she would recommend chemo, she was going to have all my pathology, all my slides re-examined. Here's a clue to my latent empowerment. I asked her why. And here's a clue to her willingness to engage. She could have dismissed me by saying something like, oh, it's standard procedure. Instead, she explained that lab results aren't a given, and she wanted more information because, and then she showed me the pathology report and pointed to the sentence she said was troubling her. It's unclear whether or not there has been vascular invasion. Then she explained what that meant. And by doing so, she gave me the tools to begin to understand the broad mechanisms of cancer and metastasis. Philomena gave me a seat at the table of partnership. She recognized both my fear and my intellect. She gave me the space to take responsibility for myself. She modeled the ideal type of doctor-patient relationship for me. Since that first cancer in 1994, I've had 2 additional occurrences, each one brand new, each one from scratch, an invasive breast cancer. The second was in 2005, and the third just a few years ago in 2009. I've spent the equivalent of a full-time job, a full-time career, navigating between, interacting with, and studying medical oncologists, radiation oncologists, breast surgeons, psychologists, nurse navigators, nurse practitioners, chemo nurses, imaging techs, parking lot attendants, receptionists, medical history forms. Oh, the zillions of forms I have filled out. MRI machines, radiation machines, PET, CAT, and bone scanners, IV poles, needles. Oh, the needles. Waiting rooms, exam rooms, ORs, ERs, recovery rooms, just to name a few of the elements that make up one patient's cancer ecosystem. What I realize today is that I've used all that time refining how to be an engaged and empowered patient, and that a large portion of that effort has been spent on engaging and empowering my medical team in a dynamic, interactive relationship, all in the service of my health. So to all of you here tonight, but most especially to those of you who are medical students, I invite you to think about this. We are all equal actors in the healthcare system, and we are all works in progress. You will hear the terms empathize, be present, listen to your patients. You will hear that throughout your career. And when you hear them, I want you to see beyond the cliches those words have become. I want you to stop yourself from rolling your eyes, and I want you to find something you can do to remind you how to connect with the person in front of you. It can be as simple as looking them in the eyes. But if you take only one thing from this class, let it be this. Like Philomena, my oncologist of 20 years, you too have the power to affect others positively, regardless of the outcome. Thank you. Okay, now I have some announcements. If you'll just give me a second. Sorry. Oh, right. So for those of you who may not know, I'm a member of the Stanford MedicineX ePatient Advisory Panel, and I work with Dr. Chu on the MedicineX conference. And Dr. Chu asked me to make the following announcement for you guys. If you're joining us for the first time, a quick reminder that there's a simultaneous conversation happening on Twitter right now using the hashtag MedX. And as the moderator of today's class, I'll be taking questions from social media. So please make sure to start up your Twitter client and join in the online conversation and interact with today's panel, the person moderating today's panel. That's Britt Johnson, who's also known as the Hurt Blogger. She was here last week. She's moderating the online tweet chat discussion tonight. Also, please note you're watching a live online program, and there's a delay between the real-time events and the live stream you're watching. So tweets from our in-class guests will appear before you see the real-time events that they're tweeting about unfold on the video live stream. So now I'm going to introduce our first speaker to you. Get my notes, sorry. And our first speaker is Dennis Boyle. Dennis is a partner and one of the founding members of Ideo.
A few slides on who Ideo is. 625 plus people, maybe 15 different disciplines of all sorts. Design thinking, our process, what we depend on, a human-centered approach innovation. It's using empathy to understand people's needs on multiple levels. What's desirable? That's where everything should start, and the business and the technical factors should follow that. To get engagement, to get things to continue to happen, in our experience, you need belief, you need knowledge, you need action, and this feeds on itself in a loop. But the most important part of this loop is action in our experience. Start with action. We call it a bias towards action. So hopefully my quick little vignettes will reinforce this. So the things I'm going to try to talk about are this: understand the journey and create empathy on this journey. Doing becomes believing, so bias towards action. Some call it fake it till you make it. Feedback on progress, make that short and long term. Engagement is contagious and make it social. And get help from Elmo and Cookie Monster. So these kind of projects, these design thinking projects start with how might we, what if, what is the future of, these open-ended questions. So I'm just going to go through some good stories and we'll go from there. Heartstream, how might we enable a bystander to defibrillate a person who's having a heart attack right in front of your eyes? This was a local startup here in the late 90s. So a scenario which we all hope we don't run into, but happens every day, everywhere. At the time, there was nothing out there other than what professionals use. So we had to start with something. We went to EMTs and fire departments to try to understand what their process was, but they're highly trained. So the idea was to move towards somebody who was almost not trained at all, just surprised at, and they were having these devices in the public eye or in a public space. So starting with Fireman Fred and moving to retired Rita and going from there, but looking at what's the journey and trying to understand every step of the way and building a design off of what kind of a journey, what kind of a sequence would happen in a very short period of time, of course. So building models of all sorts to just start somewhere and start showing them to people, starting with professionals, but then starting to show them to having mall intercepts with people. You say, we're going to show you something, it's going to be a surprise. Would you like to participate? And they'll say, well, I'm too busy, okay. And so without any prior knowledge, we start showing models, throw mannequins down on the floor, and give them a tiny amount of knowledge and start from action here. And so over a course of over a year, we came up with designs that utilize current technology, which is very sophisticated. Device could be, if you were to come upon someone that was lying on the floor, one of these devices nearby, you attached these pads to their chest and push the button, everything could happen automatically without any more involvement by you. But it turns out that actually confused people. They stopped. They got worried because they thought they needed to do more than just that. And so we built in a 1, 2, and a 3-step, and a voice that was talked you through this, and you got to choose. It told you to push the button, but you got to choose whether to push it or not. And the paddles are probably the best story here. The technology allows these paddles to work no matter almost where you put them. It's very forgiving. But if you didn't have these instructions, people were confused and they waited a few extra seconds. They thought, is something wrong? Is it defective? So we put the instructions on there to just help people. You know, they've seen ER. They know where the paddle is kind of supposed to go like this. So this just stopped people from worrying about it and got them to move to the next step. So that's a quick little example of design for engagement, and sometimes having to put more of steps and more design in than you might think was necessary based on the technology. Now this is a cool story. One of the designers was on a plane just last year, and someone across the aisle had a heart attack, and the flight attendants went into action and saved his life. They actually had to do it twice. A bunch of other doctors came out of the woodwork, helped him. They diverted the plane. It was stable. He got off. And these 2 flight attendants had done this at least 3 times, and they said, this thing is worth its weight in gold. It saved thousands of people. One of the first times, the Delta flight attendants didn't want to have that responsibility. Somehow they were convinced to try it, and the first person to be saved was a flight attendant. So the union flipped at that point. New York University Medical Center, how might we improve the patient admission experience? A specific area had very low scores. They were trying to figure out how to make a better experience. So all the classic interviews and observations and trying to understand what the issues were. But the radical thing that this team did is they got permission to check themselves into the medical center themselves without the knowledge of the kind of the rank and file. So they could experience it firsthand empathy. And so all this took place, and to feed back the data that they had, they arranged to have all the people, New York Medical Center people that they were working with out for a dinner, but they arranged to have it in the kitchen where there's no separation for the front and the back of the house. They had people wear kind of odd little bibs and put on little paper booties, and they went and had them do some random measurements. They read them all sorts of restrictions, and then they didn't bring people what they ordered, or brought them 2 orders, or they never came at all. They basically went down the list of all the things that their patients were experiencing then. Later in the meal, everyone was pretty annoyed, and then there was a reveal with all these professional actors who, there's a lot of them in New York, I guess, that you can hire. But this whole group became very empathetic. They'd heard all these complaints, but they really experienced them. And this was a clever ruse by the design team to get the win over the medical staff. And they really got into their work, and their ratings in this whole ward, this whole section, went from one of the worst to one of the best because they were so engaged. Cool story. Eli Lilly, one of my big clients, how do we improve this delivery experience for one of their wonder drugs? Forteo, if you can stick with this, if you're a woman who has osteoporosis, if you can stick with this 1-a-day injection for 2 years, you can get this kind of improvement in the bone density. It is a true wonder drug. But it was a 9-step process. You're asking an 85-year-old woman to take all this stuff out, prime a syringe, go through all these steps. It was terrifying. People couldn't stick with it. It just wasn't right. So there was a whole effort to change the system. The design team moved from 9 steps to 2 steps with a very clever device that was, you got once a month, very low force, no priming, very accurate. So all that was fine, but the killer app, this got us like a B, but the thing that really got the whole thing to work was this kind of onboarding, a little bit of training, a lot of personal attention at first, more than usual, and then the simple thing of this simple little case that your injector pen would go in, and this would stay in the refrigerator. And you'd pull this out every morning, and the needles that you'd set up at the beginning of the week were there to remind you if you'd taken it or not, because often 20 minutes after you've taken it, and it's back in the, did I take it or not? And you can go back, oh, the needle's gone, so I must have. So it's like a little pill reminder. This thing really pushed the thing over the edge and made this a winning strategy. +3 Network. This is a local startup that aggregates all your active data to try to improve healthy behaviors, mostly in being active, exercising, and so on. Takes data from GPS watches and smartphones, but they've got a couple of tricks. They get sponsors to donate money, so you earn money for any charity that you choose out of their whole list. It's a small startup in Redwood City, very compelling, because here you are, everything you do is earning money for something you care about. So that was a win. So, and all this data gets fed back to you. Here's this run I did, the Chase Corporate Challenge, tells you all the data if you're a kind of a data geek like I can be. How much you, and so it's all, you have your own page, but the real killer app is what we helped them develop, which is not just your own page. This is all this quantified self personified, but you start to see what everyone else in your group, in this case the company, the group at Ideo, what they're all doing. So you're in a friendly competition. There's kind of a very virtuous cycle that's formed here. You can see where you are on the leaderboard. You can see how much you've got to go to get to the person on top of you. And then you can see what everyone else is doing. You can comment, hey, you're in Indianapolis too, so let's run tomorrow morning or something. Awesome. All this is this quantified us, we're starting to call it. And that's very compelling and very engaging. It's quite remarkable how this is starting to take off. And you get thank you notes from your causes for thanking you for doing all this work. And instead of just 3 or 4 people running races, now we have 50 people because they're all connected in this system, and it seems to feed on itself. So pretty remarkable, and a great thing of this making it social for being positive. Omada Health, an Ideo spinoff, how might we empower people diagnosed with prediabetes to avoid converting to type 2 diabetes. 80 million people in the U.S. have prediabetes, almost 1/3 of all adults. A little tiny spin-off of 5 started just 2 years ago. They built an online product built on this clinical trial from 2002, the DPP. Lots of success originally, so they built on that, and their little pilot study showed the same results as the original pilot, in-classroom pilot, but this is all online. So last year, this is a 12-person company. Now it's a 30-person company. They had 500 people in their program last year. This year, their goal is 10,000 people. It's really starting to take off. But the thing, it's all based around a 16-week core program online, food, activity, challenges, sustaining, all sorts of online courses. But the thing that really made this take off is there's little groups of 12 online. And after the first week or two, the real thing that makes this work is this group conversation. People start supporting each other and moving from there. And since these groups have been placed in the same city, people start getting together and walking together and cooking together and becoming friends real time. So this Make It Social has been their big surprise, or their big app that works. And then our last bit is Elmo Calls. This is a bit of from our toy lab at Ideo, but how to engage children and parents. So working with the Sesame Street people, lots of games and songs and riddles and so on to start. But then a little experiment really turned into a great thing called this Happy Habits. So the parents can now program Elmo to call and talk to the child about what's coming up. And so wake up time, bedtime, time to potty, brush your teeth. So
Hi, it's Elmo. Elmo heard that it's time for your bath. Mm-hmm. Oh, Elmo can only talk for a minute because it's time for Elmo's bath, too. Oh, Elmo loves taking a bath. Elmo scrubs his whole body with soap. And Elmo always remembers to wash between his toes. When Elmo's done, he shakes off his fur like this. Do you do that? No, you don't have fur. Oh, what's that, Mommy? Elmo has to go before the water gets cold. Bye-bye. Oh, coming, Mommy. Coming. Bye-bye.
you didn't know Elmo had a mommy, did you? But now you don't. So Elmo's made over 150 million calls in the last 18 months, and about 4 million have been that. So it's just, now, of course, Cookie's going to call. I don't have any time for this, but that's another. But Cookie has permission to talk about food. So go take a look at what Cookie's telling kids to eat. So he still tells them to eat cookies, but so a lot of healthy foods as well. All right, so yeah, the journey and empathy, doing becomes believing, make feedback both short and long term, and engagement, make it social. Engagement's contagious, and of course, you got to get help from Sesame Street. So, very good, thank you. All right, I'll tee up my partner here. I don't know how to make it full screen, but I'm working at it.
Thank you, Dennis. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce our next guest, and our guest is Brian Garcia. Brian is the CTO for Healthogen, which is a division of Aetna, and Brian's responsible for technology, strategy, product, and design.
Thank you very much. All right, so what I'm going to talk about today is how we implemented design in a very large healthcare company, and specifically within our division. So a bit of background on Healthogen. So we are a division of Aetna. Aetna is the second largest health insurer in the US. Most of you are probably familiar with them. We were created about 3 years ago with the express purpose of diversifying Aetna's portfolio outside of the health insurance space. So I don't deal a whole lot with insurance. Most of what we deal with is software. Software for patients and software for providers, either provider groups or large hospital systems. The specific focus of a lot of our software is built around analysis of medical information. We have a team of doctors that write lots of rules and so on and so forth. My background is an engineer by training and by trade, but I'm not going to talk about technology, and I'm not going to talk about engineering. And we don't really talk about technology and engineering in Healthagen, despite the fact we're a technology and engineering division of Aetna. So to keep the stories rolling, there's a few sparks that got me into design. I don't come from a design background. Frankly, didn't even know what it was a few years ago. But I got introduced to it in 3 different ways. The first way was when I first joined Healthagen, I did a presentation for a small group of doctors that focuses on a lot of our clinical rule sets, and a lot of them do practice as well. And I was talking about EMRs. For those that don't know, an EMR is an electronic medical record system. For med students in the room, you're going to love them. They do good things, but they are a bit challenging when you're actually focused on the care of a patient versus the coding of an encounter with that patient. So I went through a lot of technical details about the focus on the EMR and so on and so forth. And by the end of it, one of the doctors came up who I didn't know before. I know her quite well now, and told me a story. And the story was a friend of hers that was diagnosed with cancer about 6 months before I had given that talk. And she first thanked me about talking about EMRs and some of the constraints as far from the perspective of a doctor. But then she told me the story of Susan. It's not a real name. But she told me the story of Susan and the interaction between Susan and her doctor, her oncologist, who she had actually recommended. And the interesting characteristic about this interaction was her doctor, the oncologist, had horrible, horrible ties, wore absolutely atrocious looking ties. So her first few visits, she became very infatuated with his tie, wondering, where would you buy a tie like that? Why in God's name would you wear a tie like that? Did your wife let you go out of the house wearing that tie? And she talked more and more about this, but the focus of that story is not so much the tie, it's the fact that A, she had a personal and emotional relationship with the oncologist, and B, she had something that was part of that relationship that added a bit of humor, a bit of levity to that conversation that is not an often levity-ridden conversation. About 6 months later, that doctor got an EMR. And her next visit, the next view of that doctor was his back. So she now saw his white coat. No tie, no face, no funny sunglasses. That technology intruded in between the doctor and the patient and intruded in that emotional relationship and brought back the fear and the anxiety of the condition that she had. And that story pissed me off. As an engineer who builds software, that's my fault. We intruded in that very emotional relationship, and that's wrong. That was spark number 1. So this is effectively the view. In health tech and many other sectors, we've often treated technology as the front man. How do we aggregate data? How do we get more information in the hands of doctors? Because that's what they need. How do we get more information, data, in the hands of patients in the forms of PHRs and patient portals? Thinking more information equals a more informed user, which must mean better care. Well, unfortunately, that equation proves wrong time and time again. So generally, as an industry, we've been spending all our energy on designing the technology. How do I get data from point A to point B? How do I get data from this database to that database? And that's not the right focus. It's not, because it doesn't matter. I can ship data from left to right, from front to back, and from top to bottom, and it doesn't matter if it doesn't actually affect the relationship and the care of a patient and how a physician is able to care for that patient. Every doctor I have the pleasure of working with got into practice, every single one of them told me the same story, to take care of patients. And every single one of them told me, and technology almost always gets in the way of me taking care of a patient. And I was asked at another conference when I did a talk, do physicians really despise technology? Do they just not want to use it? And I said, yes, but not because they don't like technology. It's because it's the wrong technology. It's the wrong solution for the problem that they're trying to solve. You tried to solve a technology problem. They're trying to solve a patient care problem. Those two things weren't aligned. So we focus a lot in Healthagen on getting out of the way, moving to the background. And if you know our technology is there, we didn't do it right. We need to get out of the way of that doctor-patient relationship, of that patient-family relationship, or whatever relationship that is, and enrich it in some meaningful way. The technology is just a meaningful way to enrich that relationship. This was the second spark, and this was several years ago. I had got into Agile. I come from a large company that did waterfall. For those not technical, it's a very sequential process, kind of like stormtroopers marching to take on the rebels. Not a very fun process either. So what Agile started bringing to me, and the reason I wanted to go down this road in a very large organization, was the individuals that were creating software that were part of teams didn't feel like they were part of teams. They felt like they were executing tasks, and they had no idea why they were doing it. They didn't understand the fundamental purpose of why they came in every day from 8 to 5, from 9 to 6, from 10 to 10, or whatever the case may be. And that purpose became very, very important to me. That purpose wasn't there, and changing the methodology of how we built software was really, really important. Unfortunately, it was only part of the puzzle. That helped people build software in a better way. It didn't help us build better software. Then I met Kyra. So Kyra and I had the great fortune of working with about 2.5 years ago for about a year. And it was about 2 months into me joining Healthagen. And I remember the call. She called me up, said, Brian, I want to try something completely different. And I was in already. Like, that sounds great. Didn't even know what it was, but it sounds great. So we ran an event called RFP Live Design. And what we did with that event is we brought in a group of designers and design firms and focused on a very specific problem around social caregiving. And what are some of the constraints of social caregiving? And the event was designed by Kyra and several others to be very focused on caregivers, those who have actually done caregiving before, doctors, technologists like myself, end users, and designers that thought about how humans interact with the world around them. This was my first real foray and experience into design, and I was hooked immediately. Like, this was the last piece of the puzzle that I was craving. I knew how to build software. That was all fine and good. I knew how to put teams together. That was all fine and good. But actually engaging with people and understanding what actually drove their behavior, and then designing technology to be able to influence that behavior, reinforce that behavior, or at least support that behavior in some meaningful way, that added so much more purpose to what I do and what we do that I came home that Monday and completely changed our strategy on how we were going to do technology in Healthagen. If these sparks didn't hit, then I would probably be sitting in front of a large engineering audience talking about how we design technology, not how we try and implement software that eases the burden of care between patients and physicians and family members and so on. So I walked away from that very excited, very charged up about design, maybe a little more so than I should have been. Like, this was the silver bullet. This was exactly what I needed to sprinkle a little bit of design on top, and everything was going to be fine. And it's not fine. It wasn't the only thing. So for those of you that don't know what 42 is, for those of you that do, it's a callback to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. You can look it up on Google, and it'll tell you it's the answer to life, the universe, and everything. I initially thought design was that. This was the key to the equation. This was the holy grail. And it wasn't. It's been a very challenging process implementing this inside of an organization that wasn't a design-first organization. We aren't a design company. We're a healthcare company that builds software for hospitals and patients. Much to my surprise, our rollout and implementation of design and how the organization adapted to it probably went about 2 times faster than I ever thought it would. One of the big reasons it went so fast is we engaged the entire organization in the process. One of the big things that we did is we do offsites from time to time, and the executive team gets together and talks about finances and sales and marketing, and really fascinating conversations. But what we also do is we do some exercises. So we ran them through a design workshop. So in that time, we built a design team. Again, very fortunate to have a former Ideo staff member being the head of design for Healthogen. And he's built a design team. And we ran a design workshop with the executive team. And we brought in patients, real patients. And the focus is on medication adherence. And the story of Father Bob is still talked about today, 2 years after we did this. And Father Bob was on 27 different medications. He was about 78 years old, kind of forgetful on taking a lot of those medications, as you might imagine, being on 27 different medications. Often lost his pills, but the interaction of the Healthogen staff members and the executives with a real patient that was trying to solve a real problem that had nothing to do with sales and marketing and financials, that impacted that entire team more than I could ever tell you. The stories, again, still come out today of remember Judy, remember Sam, remember Father Bob, who's still probably the most famous one from that event. That really got the hook into the organization to look at design as one of our biggest differentiators and why we did what we did. It brought purpose to our organization. It brought purpose to why we do what we do. And having that human element as part of what we do was incredibly powerful. So we've been at this for about 2.5 years, running through different scenarios, implementing design in different ways. We've changed the recipe several times. At this point, we've infused the way we look at design and the way we look at building solutions pretty much throughout every process and every activity that we do. So Healthogen does a couple different things. On the commercial side, we've acquired a couple software companies in the past and integrated them together, but we also create new companies and incubate new companies around fundamental problems in healthcare and building sustainable businesses around those problems. And in that, we have a method that we go through what are the problems, build a hypothesis around the problem, run some experiments around that hypothesis, and off we go, and ideally a great business shoots out the other end. The way we've implemented design, it's really infused itself into all the way into what problem are we actually trying to solve. So it's not just in how we build software, it's how we actually identify and articulate problem statements and the way those problem statements manifest themselves. Some interesting things that we've learned is design can sometimes be weaponized. And what I mean by that is designers create extraordinarily beautiful experiences. What often happens with some of our sales teams is they really like those extraordinarily beautiful experiences. And they take them away and start shopping them in front of customers before we've actually built any software. So we've started to learn what the sequencing is and how design is affecting different aspects of how we run the business, how we build software, how we deploy that software and get it up and running. And we've tripped and fell quite a few times on approaching the right problem, implementing our design practice in the right way, and being able to kind of iterate through how we engage both our internal user base as well as, more importantly, our external user base. I think that one of the biggest benefits that we've got out of it is we've gotten people out of their seats and into the houses, homes, doctors' offices, hospitals, and actually watched how care is given, actually watched how patients behave. We do study after study, and not forums or user groups, but actually in-home studies of how patients react to different situations. And it's been incredibly valuable, and I hope we're able to keep it going for a very long time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian. Okay, before we continue, I'm going to do another little announcement, which is to just take time to shout out to everyone on Twitter. If you are following this conversation online, just to remind you, Britt Johnson, who's otherwise known as the Hurt Blogger, is moderating the Twitter discussion on the MedX hashtag. And again, if you're just joining us, we have with us today Dennis Boyle from the design firm Ideo and Brian Garcia from Healthogen. Now, e-patients and caregivers out there, what questions do you have for our panel today? What might you like to ask them about design thinking and its role in patient engagement? Healthcare providers, technologists, and researchers out there, what are the real problems you're facing that you think might be addressed through design thinking? Tweet us your questions or responses or comments, and we'll do our best to have our guests address them during this class in this Stanford Medical School course, Engage and Empower Me, for Thursday, January 23rd, 2014. So now that we've done with all the talks, I'd like to bring it out to everyone in the room. Does anybody have a question or a comment to start out our session? Anyone? Anyone? Otherwise, I have one. Okay.
I know some of you have questions.
Yeah, I hope you have questions.
You just have to prime the pump, I think.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is so interesting about what I'm seeing in healthcare today and the involvement of design is that it's catching on. And healthcare is known as this sort of clunky big ship. And so I'd like to ask both of you for some practical examples of how maybe you've even had to innovate to confront and overcome some of the barriers to the adoption of innovations in healthcare.
So one of the things that we've been focused on is there's a big trend in consumerism in healthcare. And it's funny because we talk about healthcare and convenience, which seem like oxymorons today. I've yet to actually find anybody that would claim the healthcare system is a convenient system to interop with. One of the things that we had to break down was cost transparency. Healthcare is an interesting industry where you go and get goods, you go into the checkout, they don't tell you how much anything costs, you leave, and 30 to 45 days later, you get a bill. Imagine that happening at Walmart. You go and fill your cart, you go to the checkout, they don't tell you how much anything costs, and 45 days later, you actually get a bill. That sounds absolutely ridiculous. So one of our businesses that we focused on was how to bring a consumer and retail experience to healthcare, and specifically around cost transparency. One of the big barriers around cost transparency is many hospital systems and payers don't want to share data. And we need that data to understand what the cost on a per procedure basis is or a per service basis to create that shopping experience. Well, there's no price list that is freely available for a MRI or a CAT scan or a physical. You can't go and look it up to say this facility and this facility are these costs with these levels of quality, and I want to go to this one. That shopping experience doesn't really exist. So we had to break down a lot of those barriers, some of which were actually federal regulations around antitrust laws. We ended up spending about 8 months going through lots and lots of legal and policy issues, as well as the barriers of accessing and aggregating information so we could make inferences on the cost of care, both locally and regionally. Because it's what patients really care about is within my realm of access, how do I know how much things cost? And how do I know any sense of quality about that particular cost? So going to a low-cost healthcare site might make you a little edgy. There's some things that you might not want to go to the lowest bidder on. So that aspect of quality is really important. It was a really interesting exercise, and new things popped up that I would have never expected. The federal regs one was actually one of them.
I'd just like to build on some of that, especially some of the things you said in your talk, where in the last, say, 10 years, maybe even less, we're working more and more with healthcare systems, hospitals, and engaging their kind of leadership and a lot of the medical personnel and trying to get them in touch with patients in examples like you gave and I gave. That's happening more and more. Maybe 15 years ago that didn't happen at all. And now we're working with Stanford here, we're working with Palo Alto Medical Foundation, have worked with Kaiser in the past, and maybe 6 or 8 other hospital systems around the country, and people are seeing the value of this empathy and connecting with their patients and making the healthcare professionals' lives better at key junctures, like the shift change or the remote patient monitoring, or everybody's struggling with how to manage chronic conditions now. And it's really not a doctor-patient relationship anymore because they're not prepared for it. It's a big care team that has to manage this and be coordinated. So everybody's trying to figure this out now, and it's the old ways don't have enough horsepower anymore. Design and this kind of approach is valuable and is needed. So complex problems.
We're going to get the mic to you.
I obviously see the value in doctors engaging more personally with their patients, but there's also a lot of complaints about the timeliness of getting care. Like, you go into the emergency room and you're waiting hours and hours. How do you reconcile like making that more personal connection with the healthcare provider and like speeding up the process?
So one of the things we've done a lot of study on is not only in the emergency room, but also in the doctor's office. Seeing a dermatologist in New York is about a 3-month wait list, as an example. That's a long time. What we find more and more often is a lot of the things that primary care physicians, for example, are focused on are not necessarily on the care of patients. They're on administrative tasks, getting a pre-auth, going through these sets of tasks, filling out these forms. Well, that's not caring for patients. That's not why you spent 8 years in college, plus residency, and all the pain and agony of very late nights and very long weekends. You wanted to take care of patients. You didn't want to fill out forms. So a lot of the things that we can do from a technological standpoint is the administrative burden that is often a big influencer into those big wait times can be relieved by just looking at, well, what is the primary goal of the ED? What's the primary goal of this primary care practice? So this physician, what do they actually want to do, and how do they want to engage with patients? And what do they actually spend their time on? There's a mass disconnect between those two things. And the things that they spend their time on that may not provide direct patient value are often things that we can automate or make easier. Whether it's from a payer's perspective, that the pre-auth for a diabetic getting an A1C test is kind of silly because you always need an A1C test, so let's just automatically do that. We can minimize a lot of that by automating a lot of the manual steps that are taken today, whether it be by the physician, the nurse, the physician extender, or even the office administrator, which increases the amount of buffer time that they actually have to, again, spend more time with patients. And you can apply that same thing, those inefficiencies, in pretty much every department or every provider practice of whatever persuasion that we've come in contact with. So we're not trying to tell the doctor how to provide care. We're trying to give the doctor and the nurses and all clinicians the ability to actually provide care and not worry about the administrative burden that often restricts their ability to do that.
I might add, too, there's a great deal of experimentation with telemedicine and remote monitoring. All this quantified self. Everybody in 10 years will be wearing hundreds of devices, probably all on your phone or in your glasses. So technology is trying to, there's all sorts of challenges with that, but the technology is trying to shortcut or short circuit some of this one-to-one relationship in person. So more and more people will have to go to hospitals or clinics for less and less for checkups, and a lot more remote things will happen. That will probably help solve some of that. But it is a challenge. There aren't enough physicians, and that one-to-one relationship isn't going to exist. It's more of these care teams, again, are going to be enabled. Because dermatology is a perfect example. There's these people online, they don't ever see patients personally, but you can scan all the things that are going on. So that's one discipline that's going to telemedicine in a big way right now. But technology is trying to manage it, but there's a lot of work for design people because of all the interface problems then when you're doing this remotely. But that's a big effort. I see everybody's experimenting in that area.
Thanks. Do we have another question from the room?
Hi. I just had a question sort of about the process. I work in a very analytical academic environment, and there's a few of us that are really into design, and we're constantly up against sort of this barrier of trying to convince these very analytical types to come on board with us. And I was just wondering, from some of your experience with specifically academics, if you had any tips or tricks to kind of win people over and engage them in some of this process.
So we'll repeat the question. The question was, are there any techniques to win over quants? Give them a hug. The big thing for me, and I came from that world. My world is ones and zeros and silicon, and that's what I loved. And I didn't want to be bothered by talking to people. Like, why do I need to talk to them? I have my IDE in front of me. I'm just going to write code, and I'm going to fix the problem, and you're going to go away, and I'm going to go on to the next one. That's cool, right? But that became very empty after a while, because the purpose of what I was doing on a day-to-day basis, the things that I was investing in, whether I'm investing in them from an academic research perspective, or I'm investing them from a capitalistic perspective, I'm still taking my time, which should be important to me, and I'm investing in solving a problem. Well, whose problem am I trying to solve for? And why am I taking my time and trying to solve that problem? So we started explaining to our engineering staff and a lot of our data scientists that they love looking at numbers, but we started explaining, well, what is the result of that? We started asking them really human-centered questions. How does that affect a patient? And they just kind of looked, I don't know. How does that affect the care the doctor provides? I'm not really sure about that. Like, well, why are we doing what we're doing then? And those questions started breeding new and more questions. And it's honestly how I got into it. Like, those really fundamental questions, why do you do what you do? That's a really good question. Not to get overly esoteric, like why are we here and why do we exist, but the really fundamental questions on
42 is the answer.
42
right?
is the answer. You could just tell them that as well. But kind of probing those questions out of those individuals that really just want to work on ones and zeros or the next great algorithm that comes out with some new inference. Like, why? Why do you want to do that? And who does it fundamentally impact? Some people you'll change and some people you won't. Myself and a lot of our engineers really bought into that because it gave them purpose for why they get up in the morning and gave them pride when they go home at night.
Yeah. So my experience answering that question is, these big hard problems are systems problems, and it's not the design people against the engineer people. it's not the business people against the marketing people, or you try to get out of these camps and get on multidisciplinary teams, and so that everybody's kind of going down the field like a rugby team with the ball, and everyone starts to feel each other's pain and needs, and you're experiencing solving the problem together. And in fact, it can't be one discipline's job. It's got to be multidisciplinary, and so that you end up with something that works well enough for a lot of different stakeholders. And so that's how I see these things being successful.
Thanks. I'm going to bring in one question now from Twitter. This question is from Jeannie McCardle, and she says, I find that forced choice questions on forms do not accommodate symptoms of my rare disease with dangerous consequences. How do we fix this?
Oh, forms. Who doesn't love forms? It's interesting. I mean, a lot of industries besides healthcare have a lot of predefined forms. Interesting, a lot of those forms were developed for systematic purposes. So machines can understand how to process that data. Yeah. Again, solving the wrong problem. Yeah. Like, how do we make this machine readable? Well, why does the machine need to read in the first place? So we've done a bit of work on, well, how do we capture data in a much more native and human experience way, as opposed to really creating hard boundary questions of, is it A, B, or C? Because there clearly couldn't be no D. How can we use free text information to provide context to the answer to a question and use that free text information to actually provide a personalized relationship with that piece of information? We have the technological capability to do that and allow much more freedom and a much more adaptable and human experience with the kind of question and response way of gathering data from individuals. And machines are able to do this. From an engineering side, we can do this. But from a human-centered design side, well, how does it need to actually behave? So we're not trying to replace a human. We don't want a computer to feel like you're talking to a human quite yet, because it's very uncomfortable still. Getting better. But how do you create much more free-flowing flow of information in the question-response interaction for end users?
Thank you. Well, actually, our time is starting to wind down. So let me get to the next part of my program. Sorry about this. All right. So thank you all so much for joining us tonight for this class on design thinking for patient engagement with panelists Dennis Boyle and Brian Garcia. Thank you, panelists, for spending your valuable time with us. And everybody, please remember to join us again next week on January 30th, Thursday, with guest lecturer David Eagleman, and he will be speaking on the neuroscience of patient engagement. Stanford Medicine X ePatient scholar Alicia Staley will be here and will be moderating a discussion with David Eagleman. And on behalf of Stanford Medicine X, the Stanford AM Lab, class faculty, Dr. Larry Chu and Dr. Kara Barbanet, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you all next week.